So our first speaker today is Eleanor Barton. She's going to talk to us about the art of Spaulding John. Eleanor's a graduate of Texas A&M University, where she earned a BA in anthropology. She holds an MA in museum studies from Baylor University. Currently, she's the director of historical museums at Houston Christian University. She previously served for more than a decade as the museum curator of the Rosenberg Library in Galveston, a must-visit if you're in Galveston, one of the oldest public libraries in the state of Texas. Barton managed the library's extensive collection of fine art and historical artifacts. She has curated a variety of exhibits featuring works by early Texas artists, including Stockleth, Schumann, Boyer Gonzalez Sr., and of course, Spaulding John. Will you welcome Eleanor Barton?
Good morning. Can everyone hear me okay? Wonderful. Well, it's such a pleasure to be here this morning, and I had a wonderful evening last night at the book signing and the art fair, so I definitely want to thank Bonnie Campbell and all of the Cassetta team. I would like to also thank Randy Tibbetts for introducing me to Cassetta back in 2018 and inviting me to be part of the book project. It's been a pleasure to meet Vicki and Light in person finally, and all the other authors of Making the Unknown Known. It's been a years-long process, and it's been fantastic to see it all come together and to finally all meet and visit. But I'm here today to speak to you about Spaulding John, who was an artist in Houston from the 1920s up until her death in the 1970s. She had an amazing career, produced some incredible works of art, which I'm happy to share with you today. And of course, in the book, chapter 16 is devoted to Spaulding John. So I hope that you have a chance to check that out. But we can get started. Sorry about that. I also want to thank my wonderful husband, Steve, who's here supporting me this morning. Thank you, Steve. Just a quick overview of my presentation this morning. I'm going to talk a little bit about the project background, kind of how I came to study Spaulding John, learn more about her work. Then we're going to go over a biographical overview of her life and career. Then we'll look at some additional art pieces towards the end, and then I'll share a little bit more information about the different research resources that I was able to utilize in writing the book chapter. A little bit about me. I was introduced, of course, just a few minutes ago, so you heard this. So the majority of work that I did on the book was during my time as the curator at the Rosenberg Library in Galveston. I'm currently director of the history museums at Houston Christian University, which do not have paintings. We do not have any paintings by Spaulding John, but we do have a few works by Emma Richardson Cherry, which are fantastic, and a beautiful portrait of Miss Cherry by Dawson Watson. So that's been a wonderful piece to have in the collection there. But I encourage you to stop by and visit the campus sometime. And also, since I am an Aggie, I was so happy that A&M Press published this book. That was really special for me. So as I mentioned before, Spaulding John had a multi-decade career here in Houston, and I am so grateful, and we can all be so grateful to her daughter, Patricia John Keatley. Patricia was an amazing archivist of her mother's papers, and caretaker of the collection for many, many years. And because of the work that she did, I had just an abundance of research material to utilize. Back in the 1980s, Patricia started working to find different repositories to house her mother's work and preserve it long term. And Rosenberg Library ended up with several dozen paintings, mostly of her works created in Galveston. And also some scrapbooks that she had put together with publicity clippings, so those are wonderful to look at. The Spaulding John archive is housed at Rice University in the Woodson Research Center at the Fondren Library, and I encourage any of you to make an appointment and go look through those materials. Sometimes it is just a wealth of information, wonderful letters, personal correspondence, professional contracts, and so many photographs. So we'll see some of those today. I'm excited for you to view them. The way that I first my first encounter really with Grace Spaulding John's work was part of a 2018 exhibition at the Rosenberg Library. We had this wonderful collection of her work, but I really wasn't familiar with her life as an artist, and so that is when I began embarking on this journey of learning more about her story. And that, of course, turned into being invited to contribute a chapter to the book that recently came out. So when the first research I did, I went and opened the scrapbook that Patricia Keatley had given to the library, and the very first article was from 1920, and it was entitled "Houston Woman Blazes Trail of Art, Finds Happiness in Outdoor Work and Trousers." So Grace Spaulding John made quite a scene because she was considered the first woman in Houston to wear pants. And this was, of course, just after the First World War, and women's wardrobes were changing to be a little bit more utilitarian for the first time. You can see a picture of her here wearing her, this is the type of outfit she would wear when she would do her art: loose pants, a tunic, and tall boots, because she would walk around and mainly painted outside, outdoors, and so she had to be able to get around the terrain. But this quote here is just really made me laugh, and I gave a sense of her vivacious personality right away. So this was when she was first on the scene in Houston, but this sort of fun personality and sense of adventure continued for many decades. So she was actually born in Michigan in 1890. Her father was a newspaper editor and publisher, and her mother was a very talented pianist. The family moved around quite a bit because of her father's work, but they eventually ended up in Beaumont. So as a young child, they moved to Texas, and that is where she attended her schooling and her first early art training. And these are just some cute family photos. I love the photo of her father with his newspapers in the office. These are all from the collection at Rice. The picture on the left is her graduation photo from 1909 when she graduated from Beaumont High School. And she had taken her first art lessons with Penelope Lingen, another Houston artist who was teaching classes in Beaumont at the time to women. And Penelope noticed Grace's talent right away and suggested that she attend art school upon graduating high school. So she went to the St. Louis School of Fine Art and spent the next 3 years learning and refining her skills. And primarily French Impressionism is what was taught there, and she specialized in portraiture as well as landscapes. She went on to study at the Art Institute of Chicago after that. Many of her early instructors had been students of William Merritt Chase, and so he was, of course, a big advocate of plein air painting. He didn't like the students to make a sketch outside and finish it in the studio. He really liked the portraits the paintings to be completed outdoors, and that is a technique that she adopted and carried most of her life. And these are just a couple of photos. The one on the left is her creating a painting in Mexico at her easel outside. And the one on the right is probably about 1920. She's in Galveston at the Sealy Mansion, Open Gates, there on Broadway. It's still standing. But she created several paintings of that house that she painted outside. In 1913, her parents had settled in Arkansas. Her dad was working for a newspaper there, and she met a jeweler named Roy Kienel. They married in 1913, but Roy was not a fan of her work as an artist. He wanted her to focus on domestic duties. And so for a number of years, the family had 2 children, but the marriage did not work out. Within a few years, the couple divorced. You see a picture on the left of that's Grace and Roy when they got married, and then the 2 children, Patricia and John, are in the portrait on the right. That's a portrait by Grace of her kids. So after her divorce in 1918, she relocated to Houston, where she thought there would be more opportunities for her as an artist. And her first job was as a window trimmer at W.C. Munn's department store. This was downtown at Capitol and Travis. The building was later torn down, so it's not there any longer. But you can see it's got all of the windows spanning the corner block there. So she created merchandise displays, painted backgrounds, just created displays for the merchandise there, and that was probably a pretty interesting job for her. as an artist. She eventually did decide to go back to art school, so she left her young children with her parents. They cared for them while she went to the National Academy of Design and the Art Students League in New York. And when she came back to Houston, she embarked on her career of painting outdoor scenes, primarily residences in the city, so homes and gardens, and she received many, many commissions to do that. At that time, she also maintained a studio in Galveston. There's a picture of it up at the top, and this was right near the Hotel Galvez, very close to the beach. So she spent several months there and with her studio while she painted homes and gardens in Galveston, and the portrait below of the Copley Phillips house is one example of that. She painted in Galveston throughout her career from the 1920s through the 1950s, and these are just a few early views. I know Saturday Night Eats is featured in the book. I love that painting. And then there's also one of the pier in Galveston at the bottom, and then unloading bananas at the dock. She loved Galveston. There's a quote at the top. There are a great many things about Galveston that simply bewilder an artist. So she was very much inspired by the island from early in her career. In 1920, Grace was starting to receive more recognition for her work, and she was invited to exhibit a one-woman show at the Carnegie Library in Houston. And because her father had a background as a newspaperman, she had learned many ways to effectively promote herself and her work. So she learned that she could write up her own articles about projects she was working on, have her own photos taken, submit those to the Houston newspapers. So she made it very easy for them to publish her work and promote her work. And there are so many examples over many, many years of articles in the Houston Post and Houston Chronicle and elsewhere just discussing exhibits that she was putting together, paintings she was working on, and all sorts of events that she hosted at her own studio. After being in Houston for a couple of years, she began a romance with Alfred Morgan John, and he was called Pat, was his nickname. So Pat John. He was an attorney in Houston and a great grandson of General Sam Houston, and they had been friends since they were children. But they began this romance during the 1920s. There's a couple photos. Pat served in the Army during World War I, so that's a photo of him. At the top left in his military uniform. A picture of him while they're picnicking at the beach in Galveston in 1920. And then a photo on the right of the couple together just before their marriage, and you can see that Grace is wearing her trousers again. So she was out enjoying herself. The couple married in 1921, and Pat legally adopted Grace's two children, John and Patricia, from her first marriage. And they moved into a home at 1306 Barbie, which was located just south of downtown, near what's now the Museum District. The home is no longer standing in the Southwest Freeway. When it was expanded, meant that the house was razed, unfortunately, so it's no longer there. But we do have some wonderful photos of it. You can see it here. On the left, the cottage. It was a traditional bungalow, but Grace, over the years, made many additions and transformed the property, and it earned the nickname Patches because she thought it looked like a patchwork quilt with all the different renovations and things that she did. She ended up constructing an art studio, which you can't see yet. This photo predated the studio, but the studio was in the front yard to the side, surrounded by a brick wall. And gardens, but she used a lot of salvage materials from various places, including the Brazos Hotel when it was raised downtown in the 1930s. She used parts of that lumber to expand her studio, and then she also used bullseye glass window panes that she had purchased in Europe because she thought that they ideally dispersed the light in her studio. And these are the picture of the bullseye glass that I included on here. Those are not actually from her studio. I just want to show an example because I had to look up bullseye glass. I wasn't exactly sure what it was, but it's the intersection where the blowing tube meets the glass. It has that sort of, it's a flaw. It's considered a cheaper piece of glass. That many people don't want to use for their windows. It's kind of a scrap piece, but she loved it for the purpose of lighting her studio. And then the bottom left image is a portrait of Grace there in her studio in front of the fireplace with her paintbrushes. In 1923, Grace was one of 8 American artists who was invited to be a fellow at Laurelton Hall. Louis Comfort Tiffany had started this program in 1918, and initially they didn't even allow women, so she was one of the first few classes in this program where women artists were invited. But he invited these American artists to spend several months at his estate and just paint the home, scenes around the home, scenes around the gardens. And it was not a formal education where they were sitting in classes and being taught. They were able to freely paint things that inspired them, and they could ask for input or ask for criticism from instructors, but it was really just a way for them to experiment with their art. And it was here that Charles W. Hawthorne taught Grace how to size her linen canvases with rabbit skin glue. That is normally how she prepared it. And I kept reading about her rabbit skin glue canvases, and when I went through her papers, it was wonderful that she had a recipe card for the rabbit skin glue, and it outlined her method for applying it. So she would melt it under hot water, and then she would spread it by hand, never with a tool, spread it by hand over the canvas, let the canvas dry, and then apply the colors. And that really tightened up the fibers of the canvas. It made the surface of the canvas very smooth, and she attributed that preparation to the vivid colors and the smooth paint application that you could see on her paintings. And I will also say her paintings, out of all of the paintings in the Rosenberg Library collection, held up extremely well. They needed minimal conservation work compared to so many other artists' work that are in that collection. So I think this was a fantastic method, and I would encourage artists to implement that to make their paintings last through the years. After she attended Laurelton Hall, she went to the Art Students League of New York, and then when she came back to Houston, she continued to exhibit and give lectures around the city. The pictures on the left, that's an image of Laurelton Hall. Laurelton Hall did burn down, unfortunately, so it's no longer standing. But many of the paintings that were created by artists as part of the fellowship program have made it into public and private collections across the country. And the studio you can see below, they converted a carriage house into a studio for the fellows. And Grace is not in this photo here, but this is just an example of the space that they were working in. So Grace began doing international travel in the late 1920s. In 1927, she and Patricia, who was 10 years old at the time, went on the grand tour of Europe. And in particular, she found Venice, Italy, to be very inspiring. She created many paintings during this trip. And in 1928, she visited Mexico for the first time, and her husband, Pat, joined her. And she loved Mexico. She found the people there to be much more welcoming and inviting than the Europeans. And during this time, she also had an arrangement with the Houston Chronicle to have kind of a travel diary, and she would create sketches and write articles during her adventures in Mexico, and they were published in the newspaper. Here's a couple of examples that you can see here. So these are the sketches, and then she would have accompanying articles about her experience at these sites. The one at the top I just found was interesting because I noticed that her sketch was next to an article about Munn's Department Store, which is where she had started her career as a window dresser just a few years before. So she had really evolved by that time. I thought that was an interesting connection. This is just another picture of her painting plein air in Mexico. Just a fun portrait. And I think she added the captions that you see on most of them. That is her handwriting, and she called herself Grace quite a bit, referred to herself that way. So Grace in Mexico is what she entitled that one. So by 1930, Grace, since she had traveled abroad, she had seen these artistic collaborations in different communities, and she felt like that would be very helpful to the artists in Houston. So she organized the Houston Artist Gallery in 1930, where different artists could come together and have a space to exhibit, invite speakers, and just have a more collaborative environment. 22 of the founding members, there were 22 founding members, many of which were women, which was unusual at this point in Texas history. And before that, the Museum of Fine Arts, of course, had opened, but there were not very many other museums or galleries or public spaces for artists to exhibit. So often they would just hang their work at hotels, private residences, businesses around town. That was their only exposure to the public, and so the Artist Gallery really gave them a more ideal venue for sharing their work. And many of these artists in early Houston were not able to make sufficient income by selling their art. They usually were teaching art or working commercially as artists, illustrators, just to meet their needs. But these are a few views of the Artist Gallery that you can see there. And it was housed initially in the basement of the Beaconsfield apartment building. These are a couple of photos of that building. It is still standing. It's now been converted into a condominium complex right next to Toyota Center. So if you are out that way for a Rockets game, you can take a look at the Beaconsfield where the Houston Artist Gallery started. And although there was a lot of support for the organization because the Great Depression was coming on the nation at that time, there just wasn't enough financial support for the organization to be sustained. In 1931, Grace visited New Mexico for the first time. New Mexico would become almost a second home to her later in the years, but this was her first exposure, and she began to study mural work with Emil Bistrom, who was the co-founder of the Taos Art Association. And although she was primarily an Impressionist painter, he was a modern painter, and he really encouraged her to get more active in exploring with modernism and, of course, with mural work. And he was a student of Diego Rivera, so he taught Grace about dynamic symmetry and different methods for creating mural work. And I did find an article from 1933 where she invited him to speak to the Artist Gallery. There's a photo of him here, and he wanted Houston painters to adopt modernism and raise the devil in town. He felt like they were not reaching their full potential. So that must have been an interesting event. So as she was honing refining her skills as a muralist, she had multiple commissions in Houston during the early 1930s. And these are some wonderful photos from the Rice Archives. But the first one was at Lanier Junior High School, which I believe Lanier is still in Houston, but the murals, my understanding is they've all been painted over at this point. So these are the two on the left are from Lanier. She had Native American themed, very large murals on the wall in the lobby there. I do not have a photo, unfortunately, of her Jean Lafitte pirate-themed mural that she did at the Buccaneer Hotel in Galveston. That hotel, of course, was demolished a number of years ago, so we don't have any photos of that, but I'm sure that was a very outstanding work. And she also, along with Ruth Euler, who I know we talked a bit about yesterday, they are on the scaffold in the right-hand picture. Ruth's on the left, and that's Grace on the right. They created these wonderful ceiling panels for City Hall in downtown Houston, which are still extant and very beautiful if you have a chance to go look. But they worked with Daniel McMorris, who was the primary artist for that, who was commissioned to do that work. He was a Kansas City artist, but Grace had met him at Laurelton Hall. They were fellows together, so they had been friends for many years. And they all got together and partnered on this wonderful mural project. And here's a couple of photos. The right inset is a close-up of the ceiling mural, but you can see the entire painted ceiling there in City Hall currently. And they went to Kansas City to paint all of these, and then the paintings were transferred to Houston and installed on the ceiling there. Very sadly, in 1936, Pat John passed away very unexpectedly. He was only 47 years old, and this left the family in quite a bit of financial distress. Their children were older, but John was at Rice University, and Patricia, who became a professional harpist, was attending music school out of state at the time. So Grace was faced with these very expensive tuition bills for the children, and the loss of Pat's income. So she realized that she had to be more proactive in finding more opportunities as an artist, and she couldn't stay in Houston full time. So she began to live during different parts of the year in California, New Mexico, or New York. And she continued to give lectures and do exhibits around the country. So again, as I mentioned earlier, Grace was very slow to adopt modernism. She was just naturally an impressionist painter. Vincent van Gogh was her favorite artist. She always told people she loved bright colors. She liked dramatic brushstrokes. very rarely used dark colors, and you can see that in her work. But things did begin to evolve over time. In the 1940s, Grace remarried. This was her third husband. John Hancock was a businessman in Virginia, and they had met many years earlier on a train when she was traveling to Laurelton Hall, and they had maintained correspondence as friends for many years. But they kindled this romance in the 1940s and eventually married in 1944. That's a wedding photo at the top. The top photos from their wedding in 1944, and then she painted a portrait of John the same year as a wedding gift, and that painting is at the Roanoke Public Library, of which he was a great supporter, so that's in their collection now. So finally, Grace decided to adopt modernism around this same time, so around the 1950s, and she also began doing more writing. There was an article that you can see here from 1951, and Grace John comes up with another new art style. So this article explained that she was sort of diverging from her earlier Impressionism and the dynamic symmetry murals, and she was adopting these simple line drawings, which she called the living line theme, and she also started writing books of poetry. So she had these books of verse that were accompanied by her illustrations, and you can see those there. Memo in 1951 was the first of these. You can see one of the illustrations alongside the prose there. On the right-hand side, and then the Living Line came out in 1962, and the Knotless Thread in 1970. And these were all limited edition fine art books that are now in rare book collections in different libraries across the country. In 1954, she also moved out of Patches into a newer home and studio in near Herman Park. And she illustrated a children's book written by Eugene Pillow. They jointly worked on this to benefit the River Oaks Garden Club. And you can see a copy of the book Azalea that's on her lap there. So Eugene wrote all of the storyline, and she created the accompanying illustrations. And it's really a cute book for kids. Also in the 1950s, Grace began to experiment with a very different new medium, which was plastic. During the 1950s, it's believed that she was one of the very first artists to use plexiglass as a medium, and she was challenged by her friend Betty Bluxom, who was one of the founders of the Contemporary Art Museum in Houston, to create a work of art using plastic. Betty and her husband owned Southwestern Plastics. They manufactured skylights and plexiglass windows, and she wanted to see if Grace could create art out of that, which she did. She happily took up the challenge, and she began using high-powered drills to create these etchings in plexiglass. And you can see a couple of examples on the right, and on the left, this was a piece she was commissioned to do for a home designed by modern architect Howard Barnstone here in Houston. At 5646 Boardley, and I've seen it in different places labeled Aphrodite, sometimes Birth of Venus, so a couple different names, but same general meaning. This was in 1962 that this photo was taken, and I did see that this piece went up for auction in 2017. The house was torn down, but this piece was salvaged and went up for auction, so I'm not sure if anyone here in Houston may have it or know where it is, but it is still around. In 1967, Grace and Patricia traveled to New York. They were doing an exhibit revisiting all of the artwork created at Laurelton Hall. And so that's a photo of them there at that event. And then again in 1972 in Boston, the Conrad Gallery hosted a similar exhibition and art sale of the Laurelton Hall paintings. And 3 of the paintings that she had made back in 1923, nearly 5 decades before, were featured. So it was a wonderful circle back moment for her, and that's a painting of Grace with one of those works. Grace John died in Houston in 1972, and the title of my presentation was Never a Dull Moment, because I feel like that is the story of her life. She was always evolving as an artist, always growing, not afraid to experiment, and really an inspiration, I think, to probably so many subsequent generations of Houston artists. Certainly an inspiration to me. She's just sounded like a fantastic, innovative artist. I just included a quote that I liked that she gave in an interview in 1950, art comes through discovery, not invention. She was always discovering new ways to express herself through her art. And I'm just going to go through a few examples of her paintings. Many of these you may have seen on exhibit or in other publications, and some may be new to you. Of course, the one on the left is a portrait of her friend Ruth Euler, and that's part of the Museum of Fine Arts collection. I know it's been exhibited in several exhibits in the past few years. It's a really wonderful painting of her friend. The White Peonies also is in the collection at Museum of Fine Art, Houston. These are a couple that I found at the Mildred Lane Kemper Museum, and these are from her Laurelton Hall series of paintings. Those are in that collection there. These were in an auction with Blue Heron Gallery out in California, and these are really a different sort of color palette. I don't see a lot of pastels in her work, so it's kind of a different approach, but very beautiful works. The yellow hat on the left, I had not seen this painting before. I just recently came across it. It's in the Northwell Health Art Collection at a hospital in New York. They have a women's hospital there, and they have amassed a very large collection of art by women. I'm not sure if any of you have seen it. They have a beautiful website with all of these cataloged and digitized, and it's just fantastic. So this was a painting from 1926. I think it's just beautiful. Another Laurelton Hall painting that's in the Museum of the City of New York collection. These are two just personal favorites of mine because I love flowers and still lifes. These are in the Rosenberg Library collection, calla lilies and white oleander, so you can just see those broad brush strokes, the contrasting colors, the bright palette, just really fun paintings. Banjo Ute Girl was painted in 1924. Muriel Breaker was Grace's next door neighbor at Patches when they moved in, and she was a teenager, and the banjo uke was a very innovative new instrument that was very trendy for young girls to learn how to play at the time. So she's got one of those and sitting on her chaise lounge, really cute portrait. Old House on Bissonnette is another of an old home in Houston that she painted during the early 1920s, and then Tuesday from 1926, also in the Rosenberg Library collection, donated by her daughter, Patricia. These murals are dated 1960 at the Museum of Fine Art, Houston, and I'm not sure if these were created just as part of a special exhibit or if they were a permanent installation at the time. I wasn't able to find too much information, but it was great to see both the black and white and the color photo. You can really get a sense of the bright colors of the mural in the image on the right. A couple of very important portraits that she did, and Grace painted all of her portraits from life, so she sat with the subject while she painted them. Her portrait of Thomas Mann, who was a famous international artist. He was very outspoken against the Nazi regime in the 1930s, and so he was exiled to the United States. He was a Nobel Prize winner for literature. She painted his portrait, which is now in the Smithsonian Institute's collection at the National Portrait Gallery. And then this lovely portrait of Oveta Culp-Hobby, who was a Houston woman, very famous. She served in several presidential cabinets and was also the founder of the WACS, the Women's Army Corps, during the Second World War. And she painted this portrait in Washington, D.C. Of Miss Hobby while Miss Hobby was in the middle of meetings and planning and talking about uniforms right at the beginning of her tenure in that role. But I love the American flag pattern behind her, and she just looks very regal to me. I love that portrait. There's a watercolor, which I have not come across too many watercolors by Grace, but this one was made in Los Alamos in the 1950s when she was in New Mexico. One of the paintings in Mexico is part of the Rosenberg Library's collection, and one of the techniques she used in many of these, she prepared her canvas a bit differently for a lot of her Mexican paintings. She used brown linen canvas that was not sized, and she would leave parts of it blank, so the background would kind of come through underneath the paint and create a really interesting effect. And this is one of those paintings. If you kind of look at the bottom, there's the pale yellow sort of dirt road, I guess. The darker spaces are just unpainted canvas, and it gives a really neat effect. And then Still Life with Cosmos, again, 1923, Still Life with Flowers. These are two in the library's collection that are some of her later works towards the end of her life. These were both done in 1966. The conch shell from Cozumel is actually on board. It's not on canvas. And the same with El Greco the cat. El Greco was her pet cat, so she named him El Greco. And this painting in particular was a favorite of the staff at Rosenberg Library. Everybody wanted to have this painting out displayed because many people have had black and white cats over the years, and they really connected with that particular painting. Just a couple more. This is a portrait or a photo of Grace with a portrait she made of a woman, Naomi Lancaster, who was a next door neighbor of her father when her father moved to California during the 1940s. And Grace's caption on the back is talking about her dress, which she purchased in Hawaii. So it's an authentic Hawaiian dress that she was very proud of, and it's just a fun picture. On the right, there's a painting of the Plaza Hotel, which she made in 1955. And it was commissioned by Roanoke Electric Steel Corporation, which was John Hancock, her third husband's company. So I assume they were on good terms. They divorced prior to this, they divorced in 1951. But this painting was made in 1955 for his company. So hopefully they were still on good terms. I like to think so. And finally, just to let you know about resources where I gleaned my information to create the chapter on Grace Spaulding John for the book, and places I would encourage you to visit and explore further if you're interested. Woodson Research Center at the Fondren Library at Rice the collection is absolutely amazing. It's the archive that Patricia John Keatley put together, and it just has numerous photos, family photos, photos of her artwork, correspondence between family members with other artists. It's just fantastic. It's many boxes, but they have it all indexed and inventoried very carefully, so it's easy to find what you might be interested in, and the staff there is just fantastically helpful in pulling what you need. And the Rosenberg Library in Galveston is the other repository of some of the items that Patricia donated. She wrote her own 2-volume biography of her mother's life, and that's housed there, as well as some other scrapbooks and publicity clippings. And just if you have any questions about anything I discussed today, I encourage you to contact me. I'm at Houston Christian University, very close by us here, so I'd be happy to visit with you further about any questions you may have or any other information you might be interested in. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I was just informed we have extra time for questions, so if anyone has questions, I'm glad to answer those now. Yes, sir.
So you said she had a way of sizing her canvases, and as a young artist, I was taught to size canvases rather in glue, but I gather that she did not use any kind of pigment or gesso over the top of that. Can you tell me a little more about that?
So, according to her recipe, which was literally written on a recipe card, and it says recipe for rabbit skin glue, she does not include any additional adding any additional material to that. And I also read, I'm not an artist, so I was not very familiar with this, but typically you wouldn't use hot water with the glue, is my understanding, and she wanted to use, her description was to use hot water to melt the glue. So I think she just melted the glue, spread it all on there with her hands, and let it dry. Yes. But you could check back at the Rice archives. It's all there. It's all there.
The tolerance is not to go above a certain temperature with the water because that naturates the proteins in the animal glue.
That's what yes. He was asking about the rabbit skin glue preparation and whether there were any other pigments or other materials added to that solution. And according to her recipe, she did not indicate that she added anything else to the solution. She just melted the glue. And then, yes, you were saying that you typically could not use hot water with the glue. Yes, so maybe she said hot, maybe it was warm, and I don't know. The way she described it was hot, but my understanding is very hot water would damage the material. Any other questions? Yes.
Are there actual any of her paintings hanging right now at the Rosenberg?
That I don't know. There were a few rooms that had some of her large portraits that had been hanging in the same place for many, many years, but they have done several renovations in the past few years, and I have not been there, so I don't know. But the curator there would be happy to help you and answer that. Yes. Yes.
Where was that hospital that you said had the collection of women art?
Yes, it's Northwell Health in New York City. Northwell Health. I recommend getting on their website. Their collection of women artists is fantastic, and it spans, it's 19th century into the 20th century, so spans a large time frame. But they have different women who provide kind of a video commentary to go alongside the paintings, and it's great. I think that's the only painting by Grace Spaulding John in that collection, but there's many others that I'm sure everybody would recognize the names of the women on there. But Northwell Health. Anyone else? Yes.
So there's a museum of art and lamps and so forth of Louis Comfort Tiffany in Winter Park, Florida. It's called the Morse Museum of Art. They have a few pieces of Miss John's art on display there.
That's great to hear. Yes, I did see that. I guess prior to the house being burned down, they were able to, either the collections were already moved out or they were able to salvage them. But yes, I did see that. So that would be a great place to look as well. Do you know if they have those on exhibit? Or just...
Last time I visited, there was at least one piece on it.
Oh, great. That's wonderful.
They partly recreate some of Laurelton Hall.
Okay, I'll have to visit. That sounds wonderful. Winter Park, Florida. The Morse collection? Okay. Morse Museum. M-O-R-S-E, Morse Museum. Yes, sir.
This is sort of a cosmic question, but how do you evaluate her place in Texas art and her influence? Has she had a lasting influence on what she did and accomplished?
I hope that this project, the answer is I feel like she's underappreciated. I feel like her name should be recognized to many more people than it is, and I think that's starting to change. The fact that her daughter was so diligent in creating these archives and putting all of this information together for future research, I think will make a tremendous difference moving forward on the impact of her mother's legacy. I hope and believe that the book that just came out will bring new light to her work and hopefully influence some current artists and upcoming artists. Yes.
Seems like we heard a little bit more about her daughter Patricia than her son.
So Patricia, and I really regret that I did not get to ever meet either of the children. Patricia passed away in 2012, and John, her son, passed away in 2013. And unfortunately, this project was not yet on my radar, so I was not able to ever communicate with either of them. I think Patricia just was primarily the caretaker of the mother's collection and papers, but I do understand that her son was an avid supporter and lover of the arts, and he was a passionate photographer. So the art bug passed through the family, certainly Patricia in terms of music, since she was a professional harpist, and then John with his passion for photography. So unfortunately, I never got to meet either, but I know that their mother's career highly influenced both of their lives. Yes.
Would you comment? One of the things that I have heard several times about a number of these women artists is that they were good communicators in writing. Can you comment on the importance of Ms. John's writing to her influence as an artist?
I think she certainly knew how to garner attention. She knew how to be entertaining. Whenever she gave interview, I guess you're talking about writing versus speaking. I know when she spoke, she was a wonderful, engaging speaker. With her writing, since she was purported to have written a lot of the early articles about the work that she was doing. I think she was very effective in that way. Her books of poetry did garner a lot of attention, especially here in the Houston community during her later years in the 1960s and 70s. But because those were limited edition books, they're not easy to find, and so I think her legacy as a writer maybe is not as strong as her legacy as a visual artist. Yes.
You mentioned her friendship with Pershing Bueller. How about Emma Richard Cherry? Did she interact with her?
I know that they were friends and part of that same network. I didn't look through all of the correspondence between she and Miss Cherry, but they certainly were in the same circle, and I'm sure friends, attended the same art events and art discussions and that sort of thing. That would probably be a very interesting avenue, in itself to pursue in terms of research is her personal relationships with other artists in the Houston area. So that information is there. I've not done a deep dive into it quite yet. Yes.
Did she make prints?
She did make prints. She did study printmaking, I believe, in New Mexico as well. I didn't include any of those works. They were a little bit harder to come across, but she did study printmaking and did produce prints. And there's a lot more information and images of that line of her work at the archives at Rice. Yes.
I was going to say that Patricia Keatley was very generous to Panhandle Plains Museum, donating her mother's work as well as Beulah Ayers paintings there.
I regret, as I said before, really not having the opportunity to meet Patricia, because her efforts really made an impact on the early Texas study of early Texas art, which is why we're here. So very grateful to Patricia. Yes, ma'am.
That the transom that was for Venus, the birth of Venus.
Yes.
It shows that it was auctioned at a Simpsons gallery in 2017. So I guess if you're interested on historical reference, you might own that. You could visit the Simpsons, see if the owner would be interested in it.
Yeah, I was hoping that I could visit with Mr. Simpson today. I know he was here last night, but yes, I'd love to know what happened to that. Anyone else? Well, thank you very much. Thank you.